Greetings, my brothers and sisters, sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. So welcome back to the show, everybody. And today we have a special guest making his third appearance on the podcast, and for a very good reason. Every time we chat, I feel we only barely get the opportunity to scratch the surface on the realms of psychedelics, spirituality, and most importantly, how to practically engage in these realms to allow our entire lives to benefit as a result. In today's episode, we will be diving into that practical application and speaking to how he has balanced these areas into his life and the lives of his clients, and what his tips are for those of you listening that are either already dabbling in these realms or are looking to begin engaging in them and be able to receive the most benefit from them in the 3D plane. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming my man, Christian Van Camp, back onto the show. Christian, my man, pleasure to have you back here with me.
Woo, I'm so stoked, Ryan. We're going to be getting into some good stuff, chopping it all up.
Yes, man. I'm excited. It's like, when we planned this third one out, I was like, you know what, for this one, I want to do a real off the cuff dialogue about how you have found a way to balance realms like psychedelics and spirituality into an otherwise very action-oriented lifestyle, which I think for a lot of people, there's a dichotomy there, right? There's the stoners or the psychedelic proponents, and then there's the get shit done people. But a lot of what I want this podcast to do, and what I hope it does, is smash the stereotype of those two different realms and help people see that, hey, it's really it's not psychedelics that are responsible for people not taking action in their life. It's their own limiting beliefs and their stories and things like that, right? And so, I'll start off by saying, did you ever find a time in your life where it was hard to balance these? Did you ever find yourself stuck in stories or these kind of things where you noticed I'm either smoking a lot of cannabis or doing mushrooms or whatever it is, and I don't know if I can find a way to take action on what I'm actually receiving these experiences? Did you ever experience that before?
Yeah, I would say so. When it emerged in my life in high school, that's when I started dabbling around with mushrooms, LSD, mostly cannabis though, however, and you get these negative thought loops of I'm not doing this for a specific reason or intention. And then it starts controlling you versus you taking control of the wheel, right? And that's one of those things that I had to come to awareness of over time, but it took some time, right? You have to really come inward on those kind of these modalities. These are teachers right here. And so, not allowing yourself to become adhered to it, but having that fine balancing act, it does take time.
Yeah, 100%. And what I hear in there too is not making excuses of saying oh, well, I would do this, but it's like the Afroman song. I was going to take the trash out, but then I got high. Right? I was going to go to school.
Yeah, right.
And so it's funny because we literally grew up with that song. And, it was funny when that song came out, I was such a metalhead that I was always just sitting there I'm not going to listen to this song. Right. And years later, I'm all right, it's pretty funny. But, it's interesting because I feel this isn't just a problem or a challenge within the realm of psychedelics. People are making excuses about a lot of different things of why they can't, couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't be able to go live their dream life, And I think that within psychedelics and spirituality, we're seeing this almost in a spiritually bypassing way, where now it's not, oh, I can't go do this thing because of this. It's saying, oh, well, I'm manifesting, so I don't actually need to go out and do anything because I'm just focusing on what I want, right? Have you been seeing a lot of that too, or is it just me?
Oh man, it's so common. It's a lot of these people are in the chakra system. They're so elevated in the upper chakras. They aren't grounded deep into their awareness of who they really are, where they can go. And that's what we were talking a little bit about, is almost incorporating this masculine essence with that feminine flowing, letting the divine force guide my life, but instead having that individualistic logos, which is that independence, that free will that comes into play. Because yeah, I've been there before. I'm everything's all good in the hood. I'll let this guiding force just take me down the line. And I'm no. Over time, I had to build that awareness and harvest, this actually starts from within. You can use that guiding force, but at the same time, how do we incorporate the individualistic logos, they say, in stoicism and philosophy?
Absolutely, man. I mean, you said it perfectly. And, it's again, manifesting is amazing, but it's not the full equation to just sit there and think it's going to happen for you. Like, it's a combination, like Paul says a lot of that, quote from the Quaker branch of Christianity, pray and move your feet. And I think the moving your feet part is like the masculine part and the praying is the more feminine part. And it's very interesting because I see this polarity between masculine and feminine energy, right? Toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. It's like, guys, like at the end of the day, both of these energies are vital, whether you're male or female, to living a high quality life. And neither are toxic. There are toxic traits, right? There are toxic behaviors, and you don't have to categorize them as masculine or feminine, right? I did a Sacred Polarities podcast with Josh Trent and Amy Fournier and Alex Rachinsky and Sarah Gustafson and a bunch of people. And it was very interesting because it was all about the sacred polarities, right? And so it was just so interesting to see, like, even in my own life, when I've been so stuck in the feminine, especially with cannabis, that I wasn't actually moving my feet, and I was like stuck in excuses of why I couldn't, get my whatever that goal was. And so it's just interesting to see. And, again, like, what is your advice, or what is a piece of advice you would tell someone right now that's listening to this and feeling like, maybe I am leaning a little too heavy in the feminine? Like, what are some easy things that you found in your life, or maybe you share with your clients, to be able to enact that masculine energy in maybe a way that's not like, what we love, which is like hopping in ice baths or doing this stuff, but maybe like an elementary way to start like getting more acquainted with that masculine energy in a healthy way?
Oh, it's funny, as you were saying that, I was actually going to say jump in ice baths and stuff. That's where my mind goes. It's so funny, man. Well, I actually, just going off of that, extending upon that, I think keeping it kind of broad is change your physiological state through an external source, potentially, or internal source, which could be from a wide variety of modalities, such as breath work, or it could be eating a healthy, nutritious food or a meal, getting out in the sun. I was just out in the sun for the past 20 minutes, eating a nice, delicious omelet of tons of like egg and that Primal Kitchen mayo, olive oil, all this stuff. And I'm just like absorbing the sun's rays, having a bowl of blueberries next to it. And I'm just changing my physiology in a snap. Within 20 minutes, totally different state of mind, totally different mood. Now I'm hopping on this podcast, more energized, more lively, having that masculine edge towards the things I want to accomplish. And so I think it's really just tapping into your physiological state. Movement is one of the most powerful ways you can go about this, right? If you're feeling kind of like, I'm tapped in my feminine comfort mode, similar to what you were mentioning about cannabis, how about we change that and spark that creativity, that zest, that energy by changing our tone of breath, our HRV, our overall respiration rate, our adrenaline, all these different things we can think about. But just to keep it simple, movement, sunlight, nature, just anything that can really just charge you up and change your state of mind through your body. Because I like to say, you can't control your mind with your mind as easily as controlling your mind with your body, right? So if you can take a hold of changing your body, holy shit, your mind's just going to start sparking up.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Yeah, absolutely, man. Like a couple of my favorite things right now that because I stick to pretty similar things every day, but I do change it up a little bit. Like, for instance, I do breath work every day, but I might do a different style of breath work if I'm feeling something different that day. And so one of the ones I've been loving recently that I used to do a lot more and somehow it just fell out of it is breath of fire, just sitting there and just like, how fast can I inhale, exhale, and that one I find if I wake up in the morning, or when I wake up in the morning, hopefully I wake up in the morning, but like when I wake up in the morning and I go do that, right on the rise, it really helps a lot because it immediately enacts like the mind to go a little faster, right? And then for me, then after that, once I'm actually like, getting into that like nice fiery mode, then I go into meditation and act a little bit of feminine energy, but I allow myself to like really be able to allow those energies to kind of coincide with one another. And what I found is that that's really been helping me. The other thing that's, you mentioned movement. And one of the things that I do anytime I need like a little bit of that movement in my life is just like jumping jacks. Like I'm not trying to like break a world record or do them perfectly, but if you ever need to like heat up fast, I don't know, other, body squats are another way or whatever, but any cardio like that just really helps. And that's like typically like really only when I like doing cardio specifically is like when I just need to like get going real fast. But yeah, like simple things like that can just get you really, familiarized with this feeling of like, oh, okay, so I now understand what Christian and Ryan are talking when they say masculine energy. Because again, like, within the spiritual realm, we hear masculine and feminine energy and we get what it means. But I think for a lot of people, they're like, what do they mean by that? Right. And so like, again, masculine energy is just this like, it's this energy cultivation, it's this action taking. Whereas feminine energy is more contemplation, more curiosity, more flow, less structure, things like that. And again, both are so needed in life. But I think that, one of the things I've been seeing is just this attacking the other one, and it's a little interesting, the world for sure.
Yeah, they coincide. They work in symbiosis, right? So one thing I like to say too is like the slingshot effect. So if I'm feeling ultra like masculine, and we can do this in applications in my life, for instance, like I'm working relentlessly for 5 hours straight, I have periodic breaks, but that is like total masculine heady energy, right? So one thing I can do is let's slingshot back. Let's go into feminine energy so I can recharge and come back to that masculine drive. One way of doing that is coming inward, closing my eyes, sitting outside, grounding, doing any of those kind of things that help you come inward and foster that creativity. So, if I'm doing a lot of analytical based work, like filling out meal plans, things like that, let's change that up and do some more creativity work with product or maybe design work. That's a little bit more like, okay, I like the coloration here. And it just changes your perception of what you're doing. And it can actually give you that fuel for, feeling the other side of the coin, because they work in symbiosis, at least allow them to. So there's no dysbiosis, which a lot of us in our culture, we have this interesting change up where I think the majority of women are becoming more hyper masculine and the majority of men are becoming hyper feminine, right? And so it's creating this interesting dynamic where it's like, where are we going with this? How is this going to lead into the future of our society and our generations to come?
It's a very interesting time to be alive. And I bet that every generation or time period has been interesting in its own way. But, it is very interesting because I am seeing that exact dichotomy you talked about where women are becoming more masculine, men are becoming more feminine, and they're almost arguing for why that is what they need. Like I hear a lot of women like, I want to be equal to men, right? And I'm like, we talked about this a lot on the Sacred Polarities podcast where it's like, I want to be able to do the things men do and men kind of saying the same thing. And it's like, listen, I get like what you're talking about there, but like who you are as a woman or as a man is so unique and special. It's not about not being equal. It's just about like, where is your power zone? You know what I mean? And so like, again, for like, I think it was Nathan Riley who brought up like, women are already so much more powerful than men in a lot of different ways. Why are you trying to be a man, right? To like beat men at their own game when in reality, like with physical strength and things like that, men are going to outperform women on a massive scale unless women are on steroids or things like that. But, women raise children, right? They can make life. I mean, like it's just, it's very interesting that dichotomy happening. And it's funny you bring up the whole like balancing thing because the way that I work is very similar. And, it came to me intuitively for a long time of how I mixed this masculine and feminine into my day. For a long time, it was just cannabis at night would supply the feminine energy. And then once I actually started taking a break from that and supplying myself with different forms of feminine energy that weren't so dependent for me, like today, for instance, I worked for about 6 hours straight. And then after this call, I go to acupuncture, and that's like for me an ultimate feminine thing. Some might argue, but for me, it's like I'm laying on a table. I'm being very passive, not active. It's almost like the yin to my yang, that's my normal part of my day. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting time. And one of the other challenges too with psychedelic spirituality, masculine, feminine, all this stuff is that there's so much information. And a lot of times it's conflicting, right? Where like, for instance, I saw your post about like semen retention. And I saw some of your comments and people like, no, this is completely unhealthy. It's ridiculous, right? And then like other people are like, no, it's the best thing ever. And it's like, what if both were true and neither were true, right? And what if it was about intuition and really like, honing into these ancient practices of things like semen retention while also realizing like, hey, at a certain point, like I saw one of your comments, you're like, hey, there's a point at which it becomes diminishing return. So be aware of that, right? Like, it's just what I say with cannabis. Like, people always want to go on one side. If I talk about quitting and dependency, they're like, yeah, cannabis is terrible. Never smoke it, right? And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. if I go on the side of like, hey, this can improve your relationship with cannabis, they're like, oh, he's glorifying smoking weed. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm doing, right? But people always want to try to compartmentalize and put you in a box based on what they believe around things. And so it's a very interesting time, and I know you face some of this too with your posts. So it's interesting.
Well, going off of that, man, I think and I see this in my life too, is it's easier to go all out in one thing versus finding the middle ground. It's so much easier for people. A good example of this is diets, right? Like, let's go full on vegan, just cut out all animal products. Let's go full on animal carnivore mode. Let's just go full on fats and proteins and go keto, right? There's all these, it just creates this ambiguity and uncertainty and indecisiveness. And it makes it very confusing, but at the same time, it makes it easier for people to go all out in one area. So it's like, you got proponents that are like, psychedelics are the best things ever. Everyone should go on and take psychedelics to experience life at its fullest. And the other people are like, oh, fuck that. That's horrible. Those are causing you to think in different ways that are too abstract and crazy. Or religion, all these things it's so fundamental in life. And I think it's good to take a step back and acknowledge, am I finding that sweet spot, that temperance, as the Stoics would say? Is this essential, or is this too much on one side or the other side? And it's interesting when you bring up, earlier, you can't fight fire with fire, right? You can't fight the women that are coming up and wanting to do more macho, like, hard charging work, hustle grind culture. Like, that is fighting against your complete essence, right? And so it's like, you can't fight fire with fire. Instead, go to the other side of the coin, tap into your feminine energy. Then you'll understand how to work with men more. It's so crazy, the irony with a lot of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we were on the Sacred Polarities podcast, they were talking about like the Kali energy, right? Like, the classic like destruction destroyer, but also like there's a lot of power there, and I think that like, again, it's not that, and I hope that all the listeners realize this, like, it's not me trying to say that men can't do the things that women do or vice versa. It's just saying like, do you really want to do that? Or are you just rebelling from the fact that you believe you can't, right? Or something like that. And could you actually get farther by tapping into your innate sense, like you were just saying, and being able to like allow your own strength to come forth rather than what strength means to someone else, right? Like, again, like that's the thing for me. And again, I've gone through this in my own life, right? Like getting into cannabis, for instance, like everyone and their mother, when I got into this in 2010, was like, oh, this is stupid. You should just put more energy into psychology. This is never going to be legal. It's not going to be a legitimate industry. So that was their views on what I should do. And so then when I decided to combat that, because I knew what was coming from my heart, and I said, hey, you know what, even if it's not an industry that ever comes forth, I'm curious about this, so I'm going to go into it. It's funny how nowadays they're like, hey, could you help me get a job in the industry? Like, I hate plumbing or I hate being an electrician. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'll definitely help you, but it is an interesting irony that I've been seeing. And, it's fascinating when it comes to psychedelics. I feel like it's such a hot topic, and, especially being in it myself and talking about cannabis and psychedelics often, it's just, some of the things people say and judge each other for are just ridiculous. But at the same time, not all the things they're saying are innately false. It's just that they, again, go to objectivity. Oh, psychedelics are always bad, or psychedelics are going to do this 100% of the time. When in reality, it's just how we connect with them, right? Like, you look at people like yourself, like Paul Chek, like Aubrey Marcus, like Josh Trent, like any of these people. I don't mean to mention all guys, just the first people that came to mind. But like, you look at any of these people, and here are people that have benefited greatly from psychedelics that are also very much telling themselves the truth about when and where. They're not saying, hey guys, just take them wherever, whenever, right? And your life will magically come together. They're actually saying, hey, why don't we have legitimate conversations about these things so that neither of us are saying that, hey, you should never do them or you should do them all the time. What about talking about context, right? What about talking about, hey, if you're somewhere in your life where you feel really scatterbrained, now might not be the best time to throw all of your lease on reality to the wind, right? It might be actually a better time to provide more structure to your life. If you're feeling, on the other hand, that you're overly structured and that you've gotten a certain amount of your goals or whatever, but now you're getting to a point where you're like, do I really want what I'm going for? I have some curiosities. Maybe this relationship isn't going the way I want. That could be a time where maybe this is beneficial for you, right? But I think really the power that is required, or the skill that is required to wield the power of anything in our lives, but especially mind-altering substances, is discernment. I'm curious for you, like, how is discernment facilitated your ability to live life the way you live, right? Your ability to say like, hey, I stick to a very clean diet. I do all these things, but also every once in a while, I let myself have fun, right? I let myself go out there and kind of go the other way. And that's a lot of why I train this way. Like, well, how is discernment played into that? Your ability to wield that power and tell yourself the honest truth about things.
And it goes back to intuition, and that is one of those things I think we have that deep rooted within each and every one of us. But it's opening up and listening to it, because it is whispering at all times. It's just our ability to open up our ears to hear it. So for me, when it comes to discernment, it's taking a step back and analyzing. Okay, when was the last time I've done this? When was the last time I've done this? For instance, you bring up food. The majority of my diet, I would say, I like to say, is like 99% on top, right? And I like to throw in that good 1 to 10%. We could even say the 80-20 rule to be a little flexible here, but throwing in the food when I know that it's been a while I've been giving my body the fortitude it needs. So last weekend, there were some other foods that were available when we were with this big Airbnb with a bunch of people and stuff I didn't normally eat. But I was like, hey, I'm going to enjoy this because the majority of my diet over the past 2 weeks has been extremely fruitful. No pun intended. And, I think it's important to ask that too when it comes to cannabis. So I've taken the past 5 days off and it feels amazing. Now I'm looking forward to the next time it feels like a calling. I have no anticipation to do it in the next couple of days, but if it feels like a calling in the moment, I'll listen to that and I'll honor that, right? And you brought up set and setting in many ways. So, if I'm going into cannabis, for instance, as a good example, am I feeling like this is becoming a crutch where you mentioned like at nighttime, the feminine energy? Is that becoming something where I'm relying on this for that feminine flow? Or can I elicit that from within through tapping into creativity and other endeavors without relying on an exogenous substance, right? So I think a lot of times it's really hard to give you guys concrete, applicable tools for this because it's something that you'll have to harvest from within you. But I can certainly say this is just journaling, and asking questions about yourself is one of the most important things to do. Spending time alone and taking a step back, looking in a third person lens and seeing for yourself, is this serving me? Is this not? How often am I doing this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the greatest source of suffering in our lives are the lies we tell ourselves, right? And the lies are really, really cunning coming from the ego too. I mean, one of the ways in which I help my clients figure out like kind of what voice is at play. And I don't really tell them which one to listen to because that's up to them, but at least to be able to gain awareness around like, is this the ego talking? Is this some part of me that's deeper than that? Is the ego speaks in stories, right? So it rationalizes. So, if you're trying to distinguish between a calling and a craving, and you're like, oh, I'm really feeling like I should interact with cannabis right now, or like it's a calling, let's say, right? It's a calling to interact with cannabis. And you know what? I deserve it because I've had a rough week. And you know what? Like the last time I interacted with it, it really made me feel better. And you know what? Like, honestly, like I like the way that Fridays feel when I interact with cannabis. Like now, you're in a story, right? Where a calling is just like, I feel it and I'm going to do it. There's no story to it, right? So when you have the story there, it doesn't necessarily mean don't do it. Because again, that would be me taking your power away from you, right? But it means take a second to actually think like, is this pattern that I'm about to fall into or go into going to serve me in the greater good? Because again, whenever we choose to go into a craving, we're wiring that disempowering pattern, and this is like what I talk to a lot of people about within the space of cannabis specifically, because it's not so often that people end up becoming dependent on mushrooms or like LSD or MDMA. I guess it could happen, but I'd like to meet that person and that'd be quite interesting. But like with cannabis, it is that slippery slope because it is so easy to slip into a pattern of interacting with it every day. And I tell people also, it's not that interacting with it every day is even a bad thing. Because I've met some people that are just like, so like, especially women, for instance, that are so in the flow and they go through like a month-long period of interacting with cannabis every day and they're painting and just exploring and whatever. I'm like, that seems healthy to me, right? Like, who am I to judge, right? But the person that's like getting home every night and just being like, oh, fuck, I hate my fucking job, but thank God I have a joint. That's what I would recommend, or like, recommend someone to look into, because that's what I would classify myself as unhealthy use. And every time you decide to continue falling into that, you're continuing to wire that disempowering pattern. And I think over time that can be challenging, because how we do anything is how we do everything. So if you do it with cannabis, you're more likely to do it with food, with soda, with pornography, with sex. And before you know it, now you have a really disempowered way of living. And I think that's why it's so important to look at every single action we take, especially with psychedelics and spirituality, because again, it's very easy to lie to ourselves.
And, I've heard you say, Ryan, in the past, a general rule of thumb that's just a very eloquent way of going about things is, okay, can I do this for three days minimum, right? Can I go can abstain from the Twinkies for 3 days? Can I abstain from the pornography for 3 days? Can I abstain from the cannabis for 3 days? Asking that with some of these habits, and then you can address accordingly. And I like how you mentioned, okay, like 5 days is kind of your sweet spot. So find what works well for you. Me personally, I'm actually just challenging myself. It's more of a challenge than it is like a thing. But for the next 30 days, I'm just going to go without cannabis because I have been doing it at least once a week for the past 4 months or so. And so I'm looking forward to just seeing what my mindset can tap into with that. Now, this is not to the level of like 75 hard and just busting my ass and balls and setting myself restrictions in life where I'm like feeling like crap. No, like I'm setting this because I want to see what I'm made of, right? And that's tapping into that masculine drive as well. It's like, okay, how do I see what is possible in my life when I can take complete control over it and not allow something to pull me into it, right? Whether it is the things I mentioned in the past, Twinkies, pornography, or it could be cannabis, right?
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like a dope combination. Twinkies, pornography, and cannabis.
It sounds too good to be true, man. That's not good.
That's like an end of the world combo. If the world's ending, that's what I tell everyone. I'm like, listen, if the world was ending, I'd probably pop some Molly and go out with the Twinkie. Like why not?
That sounds amazing. Yeah, that's hilarious.
But it's very important to recognize the world is not ending, and so therefore those patterns are things that, again, it's like part of knowing thyself is admitting to yourself that, like, hey, I've been not a daily cannabis user for 4 years, but I could easily fall back into that. I know that still lives within me. I just don't give it the time of day, right? It's kind of like that old, I don't know if it's called a homonym or metaphor, whatever, of like the two dragons, right? Of like, you have these two dragons within you. Which one are you feeding? And so for me, it's like, I know that other dragon still exists in there. And it's not like I never feed it because, for instance, if I go out to California or if I'm in Aspen on a vacation and I'm with a bunch of friends, maybe I will interact with cannabis for 7 days straight. But I know when I get home, it's getting right back into that structure because I'm not naive enough to think, oh, it's been 4 years. I could totally just fall out of this and it'll be fine, because that would be me lying to myself, And so, like, again, it's taken a lot of trial and error to understand that. But when you do that, and like as you start to like build that trust in yourself, it makes it a lot easier to say, fuck it, I'm going to throw my structure to the wind for a couple of days here, because you know that you're going to get your shit back together when you get home, or like whatever you're doing in that moment in time. And so that's really helped me a lot along the way. And I think that for a lot of people that I've talked to anyway, that whole 3 days off thing really helps, because I think like ultimately, like what I tell people in the beginning is like, yes, it does help to have someone kind of tell you a structure to follow. And then after a while, naturally, you're going to fall into whatever works for you. And I think that, when it comes to, diet or spirituality or any of these things, it's just like, there's so many thirst traps and ways in which you can lie to yourself. And at the same time, there are so many ways that you can make even like the challenges not fun, right? Like you were talking about, I'm not doing a 75 hard or anything. Like, I think for a lot of people that are already overly structured, there is a point at which structure becomes catastrophic. And I know for me, there's only so much structure I can have in my life before one area starts to fall out of balance. And so for me, it's like I'm very naturally good at this point after 12 years of like diet, exercise, inner work. Like that is really good for me. So I put most of the focus of going overboard, if you will, like in terms of like pushing more structure into business, because I know right now, like that's like the thing that I'm newest at, and also the thing where I know the least in, and so like that's the area that I put that amount of structure in. But if you notice in your own life that like there is this balance, right? Like say, for instance, if you're going to take a month off of cannabis, are you also going to make that the month that you do a 75 hard and go on 40 podcasts? Like, what are your thoughts around that? Because I think for a lot of people that are listening to this, they might be looking to start this challenge of, say, taking a break from cannabis or insert challenge here, but they might already have a lot of structure in their life and it might make it feel a little overwhelming. What are your thoughts on that?
I like to think, going off of that, it's kind of like when I work with clients, we're setting goals and different habit changes. We don't stack 20 different things at once that would work, but then their energy gets spread thin and all of a sudden they're like, holy crap, which one am I juggling at the time, right? So when you're juggling, you're always holding one ball at a time, right? And so that's one of those things. Well, there's always one ball in the air, and so you can only hold on to a certain amount at a time, depending on how many balls you're holding, of course. But I juggle, so it's one of those things.
I've seen you juggle; it's pretty dope.
It's pretty fun, man. I highly recommend everyone pick it up because it's great for the brain, and it just puts you in that analogy state of like, okay, juggling really transcends right into the real world. How are we able to juggle certain things in life and pick up that, let it go, pick up that, let it go, and it goes into place what we're saying right here about, okay, if I'm wanting to do this 30 days of cannabis, the cool part about this is I personally know myself so well that I could stack on other goals or other habits. Some other people may not be able to do that. And what I mean by that is, okay, if I'm going to go 30 days without cannabis, that frees up some different hours of the week. So usually I could spend that hour working on creative work. Instead, maybe I'm feeling more of this hyper like masculine energy for the next 30 days. And so now I can replace that time with working on my course development or developing something here or whatever. So I think it all depends on who you are as a person and how much you feel like you can direct your energy in more analytical work, more structured work, or you want to go more in that kind of free flow and energy. So ask yourself that first. Analyze, are you more into the feminine energy as a man or woman? Are you more into the masculine right now? And also ask, what is the intention behind even committing to something like this? For me personally, 30 days of doing this, I want to see what I'm made of and I want to see what I can get out of this, right? How is my body going to transform and how I feel? I don't have any bad relationship with it right now. Other people, like some of you guys may be listening, may feel like, the relationship may be a little bit poor. I'm kind of getting into the point where I'm adhering to it too much. Now I'm feeling this calling to take a longer break. But that goes back into cold turkey as well. Maybe it might be better to start titrating your way down. So instead of doing full on 30 days, perhaps explore doing 3 days off if you've been doing it daily, or 4 days. Find what works well for you. But I think the whole point of all this is analyzing who you are as a person, your typical personality traits. And you could do so by taking the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs, or just analyzing yourself in general and see how you can direct that energy elsewhere.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And, the other thing too is like, if let's say, because we're talking about cannabis, figure out what the plant is doing for you, right? And then figure out like, is that something feminine or masculine that I can provide for myself, right? So maybe like I've had a lot of people hit me up recently saying, oh, cannabis for me actually helps me work out, right? So for me, that actually shows like there's some type of something going on. I'm not going to put a label on it, but something going on with regards to masculine energy. Maybe they feel a little uncomfortable. Maybe they can't access it without that feminine energy first. There's something there, right? And also like, even though cannabis is feminine, it does produce a sympathetic nervous system response on the onset, right? And so like that could be pumping them up, but then also it's like, well, then how are your adrenals doing, right? Are you getting enough sleep, right? Like there's information there. And I think that if you understand what the plant is doing for you, or at least take a good educated guess, it gives you a breadcrumb trail to follow. And I think that's like, the advice I give a lot of people when it comes to cannabis specifically, but it does exacerbate out into any psychedelic. But again, it's just that, most psychedelics are not really that habit forming. I mean, I think the most I've ever done mushrooms, even in my music festival days, was like 2 days in a row. And I was like, I am so done with this. Like
that was me last weekend. I was literally, I haven't done this before. Speaking of this, Ryan, it's so funny. Yeah. We were at the X Games and stuff last weekend here in Aspen. And, for like about 2 or 3 days straight, I was microdosing about 0.2 throughout the day, about 4 times throughout the day for like 3-4 days straight. And it was great because it was about upwards of a gram, maybe even a gram and a half throughout the day. I haven't done anything like that before, but I was getting this constant little high throughout it. Never felt any detriment from it, but it was blissful. It was amazing. But now that I like finished up this whole ceremonial grade cacao infused with all this great penis envy and golden teacher and stuff, I'm like, okay, it's time to take a break for this upcoming week. I got to start working on a little bit more of that masculine kind of energy stuff. But it's just asking, what is the balancing act here? But I just wanted to plug that in there because I just had that happen recently.
No, that's great, man. And I think also like speaking about the season right now, well, at least if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it is winter right now. And I think a lot of people that I've been talking to, they're struggling because especially as men, and I know women deal with this too, but as a man, I'm going to speak from a man's point of view. I know for me, it's really hard. Like literally, this is what I told myself and I caught myself saying it and I was like, well, no fucking wonder you've been feeling this. So what happened was I was like, man, I'm not the biggest fan of winter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work harder than ever just to like push myself through the winter so that when the spring comes, I can take a break. And, in theory, like that sounds like, oh, cool, awesome. What season is your favorite, you're going to work. But at the same time, winter is a season of death and rebirth and space, right? Because without space, how are you supposed to know what needs to die in your life in order to have birth of something new? And so I think a lot of people right now might be getting called more to cannabis or insert like comfort thing here, not because innately like, oh, it's just winter and seasonal affective disorder and these kind of things. That could be part of it. But I know for me, when I felt these cravings come forth, it's because I'm not allowing my body to actually do what seasonally it wants to do, which is actually like relax more, play more guitar, paint more, do more things that actually in a paradoxical way lead to more output, But it's hard when you're thinking about things in the day-to-day context. So for instance, if you think about a year, right, and you think about like, oh, winter is hibernation, so you can come back stronger and build back stronger, better, whatever, in spring, summer, and fall. That's one thing. But if you think about it as like, I wake up today and I'm like, oh, I want, masculine energy. I want to drive, forgetting that right now I'm in that season of rebirth and death as well. I think that's another part of like where a lot of people that are dominant in masculine energy, let's just put it that way instead of saying masculine men and women. But I think that's where a lot of people get challenged and then fall into this pattern of dependency with cannabis, because then they try to push themselves with caffeine, then they need to calm down with cannabis. And it's just this vicious cycle that keeps going. And I think that's another area that I've gone through in the past for sure, that, nowadays I help people build that into their lives of like, hey, just be aware of like, are you just pushing yourself to such a level that's not sustainable? That's why you need cannabis every day, or insert comfort thing here to calm down pornography, bad food, etc. That's a really interesting thing to keep a close eye on as well.
Absolutely. And I think, it's kind of funny you bring up like coffee and caffeine and stuff, because I consider coffee kind of a psychedelic in a way. Because I mean, even this morning, it just totally changed my entire state. Like I was able to just kindle up all this energy after delaying it about 2 hours after waking. And it puts you in this state of mind of a different perception of your reality. And it's out of your sober mindset. So I think it's analyzing every single substance you put in your life. It doesn't have to be something specified as just a psychedelic, but something that could be transferred into that arena.
100%. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up caffeine, because caffeine is definitely a drug. 100%. It produces a physiological state change. And, it's funny you mentioned coffee, because for so many years, I haven't been a coffee drinker, like maybe once a week. Like I actually went years without having one coffee. Then I met Rachel and she was like, well, have you ever had espresso? And I was like, no, I thought espresso was just drank into the cup. She's like, you ever tried a latte? And I was like, no, as weird as that sounds, fucking fell in love. So for like the last 5 years, I've been having probably like one a week, and I go like months without it if I'm just like, no, I've never really had like that big of an addiction to it. In the past, like way back when I was like 20, I definitely did, but for the last 8 years or 9 years, I haven't. Man. But for the last couple of weeks, I've been like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just see what happens. I'm in a season of death and rebirth. Let's just see what happens if I drink coffee every day, because I usually drink cacao every day. And cacao is pretty expensive. So I was like, let's just see if I can get by on like some really nice organic coffee. Rachel got this amazing stuff from Hawaii. They pick the beans individually. It's like pea something. Yeah, pea bean maybe or something. I don't know. It's some kind of interesting type. But I've tried it and it's been fantastic. I do the same thing as you. I wake up, I go through about an hour and 45-minute routine, and then it takes me about 10 minutes to make it. So it's right around that 2-hour mark. And it's been fucking awesome. And I've been loving it, because what I've been realizing is that it just works. Like it just like I can get up and it pushes me just a little bit, but not enough that it's going to like be unsustainable. And I also am very aware, because after the first one, my body starts going, let's have another one. And I'm like, no, because then it won't do this anymore. Like I'm not falling into that trap that I did years ago. So again, knowing thyself is understanding like, that part of me that wants to smoke cannabis every night is the same part of me that thinks the second or third coffee is going to be good. It's the same part of me that thinks that why take just these nootropics when I could add in these? It's like, again, understanding that pattern in me helps me just be honest with myself and go like, is this really going to help me? Or is it just a story I'm telling myself? And am I robbing myself of tomorrow's energy? And I think we can exacerbate that or like expand that upon pretty much everything we've been talking about today when it comes to, mushrooms, cannabis, spirituality, everything. Like, is this thing I'm doing actually helping me, or is it just the ego telling me it's going to help me based off a protection mechanism, And that's, again, one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on, because I know you move through this stuff too. And, again, it's like, I like speaking to people that can balance these slippery slopes into their life, like coffee, like, even nicotine, like cannabis, right? Like, nicotine was something that, for instance, you guys want an insight into my world, like I'm now day 5, nicotine completely free. I quit nicotine gum back in November because I got into it last year after like 10 plus years of being off of it completely, because I smoked cigarettes way, way long ago. Told myself I'd never interact with it again. But then I interact with a lot of biohackers and people that are like, no, dude, nicotine's awesome. I'm like, all right. So I started interacting.
Whoa, Ryan.
Yeah. Exactly. And I don't doubt that. Like, I mean, nicotine's amazing, but I realized real quickly, like, no, I'm not good at balancing this into my life. So in November, I stopped with the nicotine gum, and then I would hit tobacco bags every once in a while out of the volcano. It was like, nope, I'm going to leave those behind. That happened a month ago. And the last thing I had that was actually the hardest
acetylcholine boost, a nice little charge in the afternoon, all that stuff.
The fucking, they call it meditation mist. But it's from this company, Mitozen. It's fucking amazing. It's essentially hape, oxytocin, and cannabis terpenes. Not intoxicating of any sort, just the terpenes to give you like a nice flavor. But you shoot it, right? Like in your nose, and it provides this amazing feeling. And it was like, it puts you directly into alpha waves. Fantastic. Not only is it super expensive though, but I was like, hey, listen, if I'm going to really do this and take this break, I need to get off of all this stuff, because it was easy with tobacco bags, nicotine gum, etc. But that was harder because it was like, well, I do it before I meditate. I get out farther. And what I actually realized was, no, I actually go a lot farther when I don't use it. I think it actually keeps me very grounded. So again, it's like, I move through these things too. And, again, it's like, but being off of that, I feel so much power coming back to me, because now I know after a certain amount of time, I can try integrating it into my life in a way that's not going to be an addicting thing where I get into a habitual pattern with it. But for right now, I'm like, no, I'm not going to be able to do that for probably about 3 months anyway. So I'm on that nice break. It's been amazing. And it's not nicotine's fault. I'm not blaming that. It's my own patterns with it, and I think that's where a lot of other people also lose power. They go, oh, cannabis is addictive. It's cannabis's fault. It's nicotine's fault. It's like, no, it's your fault. And if you take accountability for that, you actually now have the opportunity to learn about where that's coming from and actually remediate it, so you can have a healthy relationship with this thing in the future. But it's fascinating, man. Really fun stuff.
You know what you sparked in my noggin right there is the whole idea. Okay, so you mentioned you take it before a meditation, right? So you had a specific routine tied to the substance, right? So ask yourself, guys, am I doing this in accordance to a specific time of the day and a specific routine connected to it, right? So maybe you're someone who gets back from work and you're that guy you mentioned earlier. It's like, oh man, I'm finally done with work. Fuck that job. I'm going to light up. And you have that routine every day you're getting off work. Then it becomes something that's a trigger mechanism to do that same thing over and over again. So the hardest part is breaking that, but it's totally possible. So don't feel like you're stuck forever, guys. I have been there myself where it's like I would always rely, it's right about 7, 8 p.m. It's like, okay, now it's time. I can spark up my cannabis. The same goes for my coffee ritual, right? About an hour, 2 hours after waking, I'll have my French press prepared. I'll grind up the coffee beans, all that stuff. So one of the best things you could do is replace that routine with another routine. So if you had this kind of a Pavlov's dog vibe where it's like this bell rings and you're salivating because you're expecting the food to come in, it's the same exact idea as human beings. If you're having a certain time of the day and a certain frequency is going on and on again, replace that habit with something else. For me, I would replace it with smoking some type of herb complex, right? It could be lavender mixed with some other type of herbs, like maybe mugwort or something. That was a great way for me to titrate off of it. Or I'll just mix it in, maybe 3/4 of it cannabis, then 1/4 of it this, then I'll make it half, then I make it half, and eventually get down to 0. And now you're just enjoying these amazing herbs. The same could go for if you're smoking and you're like, okay, this is fucking up my lungs big time. Let's shift into a vaporizer. There you go. Now you're getting into the titrating effects. You're not cold turkey. It's really challenging. It takes a lot of discipline. I think discipline is kind of a bullshit thing we see nowadays, that David Goggins level, sure, but 99% of people are not David Goggins. 99% of people are going to be able to adhere to these habit changes by swapping them with something else relatively similar.
Absolutely, man. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is exactly what I did. Like, it's, what I found was that, like, well, there's not too many things I can shoot intranasally, like besides hape. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. But what I did was, I was like, okay, so what is my story here? My story is that this Zen spray is making my meditation go deeper, right? And I knew that was a story right at the bat. So I was like, okay, first of all, let me break that pattern by doing it without and seeing that I can actually get farther. But then I had bought a bunch of essential oils from Nick Berry, Essential Oil Wizardry. And so what I did was I made this new ritual of putting certain essential oils on beforehand that are like, third eye or like dream porting or any of these, and seeing that actually, I actually get the result that I'm telling myself I get with Zen Spray much better when I do these essential oils. And so for me, it was like, how can I take this ritual, right? Because rituals are great and it's not innately bad, right? Like, I tell everyone tobacco's not innately bad, nicotine's not innately bad. But when I notice, like you were saying, that I'm in a habitual pattern and it feels like I can't take that 3 days off, that's when I know I got to start telling myself the truth, because when I do, it's going to open up more liberation. And, guys, like the first couple of days is going to be ridiculously challenging for most people. But after that, it's going to be completely fine. And at least for most people that I go through. And also, if you tell yourself, right, which is what I did this time, when you're really ready to do this, you just make a decision and you fucking stick to it. It's how you live a hermetic life. Hermeticists, they don't go through life going, well, I think I'm going to quit this day. And then the day comes and like, well, am I going to quit? I don't know. Do I quit? They go, I'm quitting this day. And when they wake up that day, they don't even think about it. And they just go, I quit, period. Right. And that's like, it sounds like kind of obvious, but when you do that and you just make a decision and you stick to it, you actually save a lot of your energy too. That's one of the main ways people leak energy is they make an emotionally charged decision, like getting out of a habitual pattern, and then they keep going back to reinstate, like, am I doing it? Is this the right time? And that's how you leak so much energy, you know? And so at the end of the day, if you can make a decision and just stick to it, it's going to free up a lot of space from which you can actually like create something new in your life. And that's been really big for me as well.
It's so revitalizing. It's so empowering, right? When we can really just be like, man, I'm the inner bitch voice we say all the time, right, Ryan? It's like, how do I put this inner bitch voice on a leash instead of letting it just roam free and control everywhere of the field or whatever? You know, like Ryan said, it's going to be challenging, guys, but it's so empowering once you get over that hurdle. And your body, you know, it requires a detoxification. So even throwing this in there is like, okay, you can support this through certain detoxification methods or things that can boost your hormones or not even hormones, your neurotransmitters in a way to make you feel good. Maybe, you know, this could be the sauna, you know, that just makes you feel so good. All those endorphins that you boost from it. Maybe it's working out. Start adding things like we brought up in the beginning, the physiology, tap into your physiology, change it from different states. And it makes it way easier to start really holding true to your true self. You know, that's one thing I've noticed personally in my life is when I am making these big shifts, like how can I optimize my physical health, which of course the physical health is your mental health, your spiritual, everything's connected. But how can I optimize my physical health through something like a sauna, through cold therapy, boosting those endorphins, boosting this feel good hormones and things that can help me progress in these areas much more readily than without them. I always recommend that. It's something that is extremely powerful to take advantage of.
Absolutely, man. I mean, dude, this has been amazing, man. I can't believe we've almost already gone an hour. Like, I feel this conversation really needs to be had because I've been getting hit up by everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people being like, how do you balance this? Right. And so like, I think it's really taking responsibility for like, if I'm going to have this podcast, I want to have people on here that not only say the right things, but also like they really preach what they say or they really live by what they say. Right. And they practice what they preach. That's the saying I was looking for. So it's been amazing to have you back on for round 3 and to talk about this because I really feel like so many people are struggling with like, okay, cool. I like these things, but how do I balance them? And how do I still take action? And how do I still like have a life that's not just me tripping out all the time? And so, you know, I've loved having you on again, man. Where can people find you? Where can they stay up to date in your work? I know you have a course that's either out or coming out. Like, where can they find info about all of that stuff and contact you?
Awesome. Blessings, brother. Yeah, it was awesome talking with you. And you guys can find me at cvcwellness.com or at CVC Wellness on all platforms. You can look it up on YouTube. YouTube actually came out with this new launch a couple months ago. You can look up tags now, which is cool. So it's kind of like social media. So at CVC Wellness on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that fun stuff. And yes, in the coming months, about 2 months from now, we're going to be launching the InnerFit course. Alongside that, the program with a lot of group coaching and accountability to really take your physique, your lifestyle, your habits to the next level with the groundwork of very powerful men joining in on this. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be that nature-driven living I'm always talking about. So
I love that, man. That's so dope. And it's so required right now in society. You know, it's like, let's, you know, again, we can spend time in the clouds, which is fucking great, but we have to make sense of it in the physical realm to actually see a change in our lives. And so I think that's so amazing. And it's so poignant for happening right now. I know I've already asked you the last question I normally do 2 different times now. So I'm going to change this up in the moment and see what comes out, right? So let's say that someone listens to this episode and they're really excited to explore taking a break and adding more quote unquote discipline into their relationship with cannabis and other psychedelics. What is the one piece of advice that Christian Van Camp would suggest for them to start with on this journey of starting to like put more discipline and awareness into their relationship with these medicines?
One thing that channeled for me is, and this made a huge difference in my life, is ask who you're surrounding yourself with in your social wellness and who's in your circle, right? Because that is tremendous on what you're going to be doing in your choices, right? So for me personally, back in the day, I was surrounded around people that were just, every time we hung out, it was default, let's smoke. Default, let's drink, right? So ask yourself, is it truly you making these decisions, or is it you making the decision to hang out with people that are making those decisions? So I think one of the most powerful things you can do right now is ask, who are the 5 people I'm spending the most time with? Who am I becoming through those 5 people? And then go from there, And if the hard part is transferring out of that, once you do, you feel so good. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely, man. That is extremely sound advice. Yeah, it's really hard to break a habitual pattern if everyone around you is just like teetering you to get back into that pattern and they're not accepting you for who you want to become. It's one thing, like if you're around people that might be in that pattern, but they're like, dude, I love you, go do your thing. Cool, one thing. But also, can you be around those people while you're trying to become someone different? Be honest with yourself, And again, if they're really your friends, you can have this conversation with them and say, hey guys, I'm looking to do this and it's really hard when I'm around you and you're interacting with cannabis or alcohol or any of these things. So if they're really your friends, they won't mind that whatsoever. They'll understand and they'll love you and you can take your space. And if they're not, well then, hey, you just saved yourself some time and effort. So I love that, man.
And they'll understand it.
Yeah, exactly. They will understand it 100%. All righty, ladies and gents. Christian is not only a dear friend of mine, but he is also someone I admire and respect because he truly practices what he preaches. And I wanted to have him back on to illuminate the lifestyle of someone who has benefited from these realms, yet still has his feet grounded on the earth. For any of you looking to take a trip into Christian's world and see for yourself how he is able to practice a full spectrum way of living when it comes to balancing these mystical and often esoteric realms into the 3D plane, make sure to dive into the show notes for this episode, where I will be listing all of the best and easiest ways to contact him today. Christian, thank you so much for taking the time to come back onto the show for round 3 today, for being a prime example of how realms such as psychedelics and spirituality can fit into someone's lifestyle in a way that is grounded and centered, and for being a source of inspiration for me and countless others in this world. And until next time, my brother, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.